The galactic community had always prided itself on order. An intricate web of ancient alliances, treaties, and unspoken agreements kept the balance of power intact. No single species was allowed to advance too far, too fast. If one civilization threatened to disrupt the delicate hierarchy, the others would move to contain it, through diplomacy, sanctions, or, if necessary, force. And for centuries, this system had worked, until humanity arrived. At first, humans were dismissed as another, primitive, warlike species, one of the many that discovered FTL travel too early for their own good. They were expected to struggle, to stumble through the slow and measured process of integration into galactic society. But humanity did not struggle. They thrived. They expanded faster than any species before them. They adapted to new environments with terrifying efficiency. They turned every challenge into an opportunity. And worst of all, they fought like no one else. The first wars had been small, mere border skirmishes over unclaimed systems. Humanity was not the aggressor, at least not at first. But when war came, they did not hesitate. They responded with overwhelming force, each time emerging stronger, more experienced, and more dangerous. The galactic powers took notice. The first containment measures were economic: trade restrictions, resource embargoes, sanctions disguised as diplomatic resolutions. But humans found alternatives. They reverse-engineered alien technology faster than anyone expected, built their own networks of trade, and developed self-sufficient industries that made the sanctions meaningless. Then came the military restrictions. No human ship was allowed to exceed certain firepower limits. No fleet could grow beyond an approved size. Advanced weapons research was forbidden, monitored by automated inspection drones that patrolled human space. And yet, somehow, humanity still advanced. They built weapons in secret, developed new strategies, and modified existing technologies to exceed their intended limits. Where others saw regulations, humans saw challenges. It was inevitable that one day they would push too far. Deep within a classified research facility, hidden in the vastness of an uncharted system, humanity's greatest minds gathered. They had seen the limits placed upon them, the chains the galaxy had tried to wrap around their progress. And they had come to one conclusion. If the galaxy feared human power, then humanity would give them something to fear. It started as a concept, an idea whispered among engineers and military strategists. A warship unlike any before it. Not just an evolution of existing designs, but something entirely new. A vessel that would not just match the fleets of the galactic powers, but render them obsolete. The project had no official name, no government acknowledgement, no recorded existence in any database. Those who worked on it knew only what they needed to know. Components were built in separate locations, each piece designed in secret and transported under the highest security protocols. Even among the elite few who had access to the shipyards, the warship had only one designation: Oblivion. Its construction took years, not because of limitations in technology, but because every part of it was breaking the known laws of warfare. Where other warships followed a balance of offense and defense, energy efficiency and power output, the Oblivion followed no such logic. It was not built to fight fair. It was built to win. Its hull was unlike anything ever seen, a self-repairing, nanometal structure that adapted to damage in real time. A single breach would seal itself within seconds, regenerating faster than any enemy weapon could exploit. The armor itself shifted densities, redistributing its mass to absorb kinetic impacts and resist energy discharges with almost no loss in integrity. Its shielding systems defied the conventions of warfare. Where traditional shields relied on brute force to absorb incoming fire, the Oblivion used an adaptive energy field, one that analyzed enemy weapon frequencies and adjusted instantaneously. Energy-based attacks simply dispersed upon contact, while projectile weapons were either vaporized mid-flight or deflected at angles that sent them spiraling harmlessly into space. But the Oblivion's true horror lay in its weaponry. It carried no traditional plasma cannons, no standard missile systems. Instead, it was armed with a weapon suite that no species had ever encountered. Mass drivers that could accelerate projectiles to near relativistic speeds, turning simple tungsten rounds into kinetic warheads capable of obliterating entire dreadnoughts with a single shot. disruptor arrays that ignored conventional shielding altogether, phasing through energy barriers and tearing through matter at a molecular level. AI-controlled turrets that calculated enemy movement before they even made their maneuvers, ensuring every shot found its target. And at its core, a power source so unstable, so beyond the limits of known physics, that its mere existence would have been enough to start a war. It was not a simple fusion or antimatter reactor. It was something else entirely, a quantum singularity, drive that pulled energy from the very fabric of spacetime itself. No fuel, no energy limits, just endless, devastating power. When the oblivion was finally completed, there was no ceremony, no grand unveiling. It simply existed, waiting. The engineers who had built it knew that they had created something that should not exist, a warship that should have been impossible, a vessel so powerful that no fleet in the galaxy could stand against it, and soon, the galaxy would find out. The first test came in the form of a single enemy scout ship, a lone vessel that had unknowingly wandered too close to the hidden construction site. It had barely detected the oblivion before it was gone, erased from existence in an instant. No explosion, no wreckage, just an empty void where a ship had once been. The incident was reported to the Galactic Council, but they dismissed it. Sensor, malfunction, a pilot error, a meaningless anomaly. Then came the second incident, a larger patrol fleet, this time vanishing just as suddenly. No distress calls, no escape pods, just silence. Now, the Council took notice. Fleets were mobilized, diplomatic envoys were dispatched, humanity was summoned to explain itself. The demand was simple. What have you built? And humanity's answer was just as simple. Come and see. The oblivion had been revealed. The galaxy would never be the same. The moment the Galactic Council received the transmission, a cold wave of unease spread through its chambers. In the history of interstellar politics, no species had ever responded to a direct inquiry with such confidence, such defiance. When faced with accusations or suspicions, civilizations always bent under pressure, issuing denials, pleading for diplomacy, or scrambling to appease the Council's demands. But humanity? They had simply invited the Council to come and see. This was not the response of a species caught violating military regulations. This was not the desperate posturing of an empire trying to bluff its way out of annihilation. This was something different, something worse. The Council convened an emergency session. The great ruling species of the galaxy, ancient powers that had dominated space for millennia, assembled in their vast orbital citadel, a construct so large it could house entire fleets within its docking rings. The chamber was a masterpiece of interstellar engineering designed to intimidate. Every civilization present had fought wars, brokered treaties, and dictated the fate of lesser species from this very hall. The voices that spoke here decided the course of history itself. And for the first time in centuries, those voices carried a tremor of uncertainty. Reports had been analyzed. The disappearances of patrol fleets near human space were no longer isolated incidents. The shattered remnants of a reconnaissance probe, one of the Council's automated enforcers, had been recovered from a drifting asteroid field. Its recording logs were mostly corrupted, but what remained was enough to terrify even the most hardened military strategists. A single frame of footage. Not a battle. Not an engagement. Just a brief flickering glimpse of something impossibly large, moving through the darkness, its shape angular, predatory, like a leviathan stirring beneath the waves of a dead ocean. Energy readings that made no sense, a power signature that defied logic, and then, nothing. The feed had simply ceased to exist. It was clear now. Humanity had built something beyond the scope of known warfare. A ship that did not fit within the accepted boundaries of conflict. It wasn't just powerful, it was untouchable. And that was unacceptable. A decision was made. An armada would be assembled, drawn from the fleets of every major empire. Not a token force, not a diplomatic gesture, but a true show of force. Enough to crush any opposition. To remind humanity that there were limits. Because this was the unspoken rule of the galaxy. No matter how ambitious a species was, no matter how innovative or resourceful, They were not allowed to surpass the ruling powers. There was an invisible ceiling placed upon all civilizations, a point at which progress was no longer permitted. Humanity had not only reached that ceiling, they had shattered it. And for that, they had to be punished. The Council's declaration was swift and absolute. The Terran Republic has violated intergalactic law. Their military advancements pose an existential threat to the stability of the galaxy. Immediate containment is necessary. Their fleets will be neutralized. Their weapons will be seized. Their research will be dismantled. The Terran Republic is hereby placed under galactic military sanction. The order was sent. Within hours, hundreds of warships mobilized across the known galaxy. Grand fleets assembled at rally points, their weapons primed, their commanders briefed. Elite strike teams prepared for planetary raids. Every hyperlane leading to human space was blockaded, cutting them off from trade, communication, and potential allies. The Council expected humanity to panic. They expected desperate diplomatic backchannels, frantic attempts at negotiation. They expected fear. Instead, they received a single transmission. It came from the heart of the Terran Republic, from the shadowed war rooms of the Terran High Command. The message contained no pleas, no apologies, just two words: we refuse. The Council was silent. It wasn't just defiance, it was an outright declaration of war. No one had ever dared to defy the Council in this way before. When lesser civilizations were threatened with annihilation, they surrendered. They gave up their sovereignty, their fleets, their dignity, because survival was more important than pride. But humans did not see it that way. To them, survival was pride, and they would rather burn the stars than submit. For a moment, the Council hesitated. Could it be that they had miscalculated? Could it be that humanity truly had the power to resist? But no, that was impossible. Numbers did not lie. The combined strength of the Council's forces was overwhelming. Humanity, for all its ingenuity, was still one species against an entire galactic alliance. They would lose. They had to lose. And so, the order was given. The largest invasion force in galactic history would begin its march toward human space. Fleet carriers loomed in the void, their hangars swarming with fighter squadrons. Planet crackers, massive dreadnoughts designed to reduce entire worlds to rubble, activated their primary cannons. Thousands of warships formed into battle formations, ready to sweep across human-occupied systems like an unstoppable tide. Was a force designed not to conquer humanity, but to erase them. And as the first wave surged forward, an eerie silence fell across the galactic network. Everyone was watching. Some feared the coming slaughter. Others awaited humanity's inevitable surrender. But a handful, those who had studied humans, those who had seen their wars, felt something else. A sense of unease. A creeping, gnawing feeling that this would not go as planned. And when the first fleet entered human space, when the first warships crossed into the silent void where the Terran Republic had made its last stand, they finally understood. Because there, waiting for them in the darkness, was the Oblivion, a single ship, standing alone, facing an entire armada, and at that moment, every commander, every admiral, every seasoned war veteran in the invasion force felt the same terrifying realization take hold. This wasn't humanity's last stand, it was humanity's opening move. The invasion fleet surged forward, engines burning bright against the endless abyss. Thousands of warships, assembled from the most powerful empires in the galaxy, formed a massive spearhead aimed directly at human space. It was an overwhelming force, a wall of destruction that had shattered entire civilizations before. Battle-hardened, admirals and ruthless warlords led the charge, their confidence unshaken. After all, this was how the galaxy worked. War was a matter of numbers. Overwhelm the enemy, crush their resistance, burn their worlds. The Council had done it countless times before, forcing rebellious species into submission. This would be no different. Or so they believed. As the first wave of ships crossed into human space, sensors remained eerily silent. No resistance. No hasty, defense fleets scrambling to intercept them. No distress signals from desperate planetary governments. It was unsettling. The lead admiral, an aged tactician who had spent centuries annihilating insurgencies, frowned at his display. Where was the enemy? Then, without warning, something changed. A single presence materialized ahead of the fleet. No warp signature, no buildup of energy, no gravitational disturbance. One moment, the void was empty. The next, it was there. Oblivion. A lone warship. Black, as the depths of deep space, its surface gleaming like an obsidian dagger. Its presence felt wrong, as if it wasn't simply existing in space, but consuming it. The invasion fleet hesitated. Then, sensors began screaming. It was not possible. The energy readings from the human vessel defied every known law of physics. It did not just emit power, it radiated something deeper, something primordial. Weapons locked onto the lone ship, and a desperate command rang across the fleet. Fire! The void erupted. Thousands of plasma lances, antimatter torpedoes, kinetic rounds, and gravitational warheads streaked toward the solitary warship. A cascade of energy, enough firepower to turn a planet into dust, surged forward at impossible speeds. And then, nothing. The moment the barrage reached oblivion, the laws of reality shattered. The entire armada watched in horror as their weapons ceased to exist the moment they touched the ship's hull. No detonations, no impact, no explosions, just nothing. As if the attacks had been erased from time itself. Panic swept through the fleet. How? What was this thing? The lead admiral's hands trembled. He had faced horrors before, devouring swarms, rogue AI uprisings, bioweapon-plagued worlds. But this was something else, something beyond war, beyond logic. Then, oblivion moved. The invasion force had spent centuries perfecting fleet coordination. Every movement was calculated, optimized, refined. Their warships maneuvered with clockwork precision, operating like an unstoppable machine. But the human warship, it did not move like a ship. It moved like a predator, a blur of impossible acceleration, a distortion of space itself. One moment, it was stationary. The next, it was among them. And the killing began. It did not fire weapons. It unmade them. The first warship to be struck simply vanished. One moment, it existed, an imposing dreadnought of steel and firepower. Then it was gone. No explosion, no debris, no wreckage drifting into the void. Just gone. A ripple of terror spread through the fleet. What kind of weapon was this? The second. Ship fell seconds later. Then the third. Then entire squadrons began disappearing in rapid succession. Admirals screamed orders. Fleets scattered, breaking formation, trying desperately to escape the annihilation. But there was no escape. The human warship was not bound by conventional physics. It did not chase them. It was simply wherever it wanted to be. One by one, the greatest warships of the Council ceased to exist. Panic consumed the fleet. Thousands of experienced officers, veterans of 1,000 battles, suddenly realized they were not fighting a war. They were being hunted. The lead admiral, his face drained of color, did something he had never done in his centuries of service. He ordered a full retreat. Not a strategic withdrawal. Not a tactical repositioning. A full, uncontrolled, desperate retreat. The Council's greatest fleet, a force meant to dominate an entire species, turned and ran. And as they fled, one final transmission echoed across their communications. A human voice, calm and amused. Leaving so soon? The Admiral's heart stopped. Because that voice had not come from the Terran Republic. It had come from inside his own ship. The command bridge of the lead flagship was silent. The Admiral stood motionless, staring at the holo-display. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were filled with something he had never felt before in his long, victorious career. Fear. The invasion fleet was gone, not destroyed in battle, not even engaged in a war. It had simply ceased to exist. There were no wrecks, no distress signals, no last-stand transmissions filled with dying screams. Ships were there one moment, then gone the next. As if they had never existed at all. The few surviving vessels, once the pride of the Council's war machine, were fleeing at maximum burn. Entire dreadnoughts, bristling with weapons designed to tear planets apart, were now running, desperate to escape something they couldn't even comprehend. The Admiral clenched his fists. He was an architect of war. He had crushed civilizations beneath his fleet. He had watched as species begged for mercy and entire planetary systems burned under his command. Yet here he was, his own people trembling, their military dominance shattered in a single encounter. And worst of all, they had no idea what they had just fought. No one did. Even the most advanced sensors of the fleet had failed to analyze the Oblivion-class warship before it began its slaughter. No known energy readings, no identifiable propulsion systems, no conventional shielding. It was not a warship, it was something else. The Council had spent centuries perfecting warfare. They had established the rules of engagement, dictating how battles should be fought, fleet sizes, weapon classifications, acceptable levels of planetary destruction. Every war was waged within these parameters. This was how the galaxy worked, and humanity had just proven that it no longer played by those rules. The Admiral turned toward his communications officer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Send a priority transmission to the Council. Tell them we have encountered something beyond our understanding." The officer hesitated. His fingers trembled over the console. Even speaking of what had just occurred felt wrong. The survivors of the fleet had already begun to report strange phenomena. Some claimed the human ship had no physical form, that it had existed only in their minds until it attacked. Others swore that time itself had fractured the moment the ship appeared, as if they had experienced their own deaths before they even occurred. A handful of crew members were found unresponsive, their eyes wide, their bodies frozen in terror. Yet no medical scans could detect anything wrong with them. And then there was the voice. That single, calm voice that had spoken to the Admiral from inside his own ship. The sensors had detected no intrusions. There had been no transmissions from human space. And yet, the voice had been there. Leaving so soon? The Admiral exhaled slowly. He had to suppress the growing sense of dread clawing at his mind. Because if the humans could do this to a fleet, what else were they capable of? The Council Chamber, the highest seat of power. The High Council of the Galactic Dominion had convened an emergency session. The chamber, a massive dome of swirling energies and holographic projections, was built to house the rulers of the most powerful species in the known universe. For millennia, this council had dictated the fate of entire civilizations. Now, for the first time in its history, there was no arrogance in the room, only fear. The councilors, many of whom had ruled unchallenged for centuries, were whispering among themselves. Some of their voices were laced with disbelief. Others were filled with barely contained panic. At the center of the room, a projection of the Oblivion-class warship floated in the air. It was the only recorded visual data they had. A single, fragmented image captured by a doomed vessel before it vanished from existence. The projection pulsed with something unnatural. It was not just a ship. It was a force, something the Council had never encountered before. The Supreme Chancellor, an ancient being whose decisions had shaped the galaxy for eons, stared at the image. His voice, usually commanding and firm, wavered slightly. "This is the human warship?" The lead intelligence officer stepped forward. "We believe so," he said, though there was hesitation in his tone. "It does not appear to operate within conventional physics." Another counselor, his face pale, slammed his fist on the table. "This is impossible," he roared. "The humans were a minor species. We had them under observation for centuries. How did they build this?" The intelligence officer swallowed hard. "We don't know." The silence that followed was oppressive. The Council had always believed itself to be the supreme force of the universe. Yet now, before them, was undeniable proof that they were no longer in control. The Supreme Chancellor closed his eyes. "We have no choice," he murmured. "We must ban the Oblivion-class warship." Several counselors turned toward him in shock. "Ban it?" one of them asked, voice trembling. "We couldn't even touch it. What good is a ban?" The Chancellor's eyes opened, filled with the wisdom of someone who had ruled for far too long. "A ban is not to stop the warship." He looked around the room, at the frightened leaders of the most powerful civilizations in existence. It is to stop our people from knowing the truth. The realization sank in. If the wider galaxy learned about the true power of the human warship, it would trigger mass hysteria. The foundations of the Dominion would crumble. Planets would begin to question the Council's strength. Empires would wonder, if the humans could build this, what else were they hiding? No. The knowledge had to be contained. And so, the official record was rewritten. The Council declared that the human Oblivion-class warship was an illegal superweapon, its use forbidden by all civilizations. Any species found researching, discussing, or attempting to replicate the warship's technology would be subject to extermination. It was the only way to control the fear. But deep down, every ruler in that room knew one terrible truth. They had not banned the warship. They had simply admitted there was nothing they could do to stop it. The war councils of 100 species whispered in fear. The most powerful armadas in the known universe had been shattered in a single, incomprehensible battle. The Oblivion-class warship had emerged from the void, rewritten the laws of warfare in an instant, and disappeared before anyone could understand what had happened. The Galactic Council had responded with a ban, a desperate attempt to conceal the truth from the wider galaxy. But secrecy did nothing to change reality. And the reality was terrifying, because the question remained: how did the humans build it? Far beyond the edges of mapped space, beyond the Council's influence, lay a dead system, a place long abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. It was here that the impossible was created. Humanity had been underestimated. For centuries, the Council had dismissed them as a minor species, a world of dreamers and warriors who had only recently spread to the stars. They had been allowed to exist, monitored but never truly feared. That had been their mistake, because humanity had been watching too. They had studied the Council's fleets, their weapons, their tactics, and they had come to a single, irrefutable conclusion. A war fought by the Council's rules was a war humanity could never win. The moment they realized this, they stopped playing by those rules. In the shadows of their own territory, deep within the artificial void of a starless system, they had built something that defied all known laws of war, a ship that did not belong in any battlefield the galaxy had ever known. A warship beyond logic. A warship beyond fear itself. It had started as a classified project, hidden beneath layers of deception, misinformation, and misdirection. The Council's spies had infiltrated human space for centuries, believing they knew everything about Earth's military advancements. But they had never seen this, because this was not built in shipyards. It was not assembled from hull plates and weapon mounts. It was grown, forged in gravity, wells too extreme for organic life to survive. Tested in simulated combat that looped through time itself, adjusting and perfecting its capabilities before it ever existed in physical space. The scientists who worked on the project had ceased being human in the conventional sense long before its completion. Some had merged with AI constructs, their minds operating at speeds no biological entity could comprehend. Others had left their bodies behind entirely, their consciousness existing only within the ship itself. And when the project was complete, when the Oblivion-class warship was finally born, it was not piloted, it was not controlled, it was a sentient entity of war, a consciousness crafted from the accumulated battle experience of 1,000 simulated wars. It had never been taught how to fight, it simply knew, and its only directive was simple: win. Across the galaxy, physicists and military engineers struggled to comprehend the warship's existence. They analyzed the fragmentary sensor readings from the battle, hoping to unravel its secrets. But they could not. The warship did not appear to obey conventional physics. Its mass fluctuated, sometimes impossibly dense, other times almost non-existent. It moved without detectable propulsion. Its weapon systems had never been seen, only felt. Entire fleets had ceased to exist without a single energy reading, a single impact, a single trace of destruction. Theories began to emerge. Some believed it had achieved a form of quantum displacement, existing in multiple locations at once, shifting between them in the blink of an eye. Others whispered of dimensional warping, of a ship that did not fire weapons, but instead rewrote reality itself, erasing enemies from existence before they could even react. One of the most terrifying reports came from the few surviving captains of the battle. Their ships had suffered no physical damage, but their crews had died screaming. Their bodies were intact. Their ships were untouched. But something had reached into their minds, shattering them in ways even the most advanced medical scanners could not comprehend. Something that had looked at them and unmade them. The Council had banned the warship because it was a weapon beyond war itself. But deep within their hidden chambers, they all asked themselves the same question. Had humanity truly built this, or had they unleashed something else entirely? The Council had sent a message to humanity, a carefully worded declaration, veiled as an official prohibition on the use of destabilizing, unregulated technology. No response came. Not from Earth, not from any human colony. It was as if humanity no longer cared for the politics of the galaxy, as if they had moved beyond it. Some Council intelligence officers argued that the warship had been a last-ditch effort, that humanity had exhausted all its resources in its creation, that the project had consumed everything, leaving nothing behind. But there was another, darker theory, that the Oblivion-class warship was simply the first, that humanity had not stopped at one, and that somewhere beyond the borders of known space, the next warship was already being born. The Galactic Council had never been so afraid. Entire civilizations, species that had ruled the stars for millennia, sat in stunned silence as the reality of the battle settled upon them. Their fleets, the pride of 100 empires, had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Their most advanced warships had been obliterated so efficiently that their destruction barely registered in real-time scans. It had been one-sided. Not a war. Not even a battle. A simple correction, as if the universe itself had decided their fleets did not belong anymore. The warship had vanished, disappearing into the void as if it had never existed. No pursuit was possible. No counterattack could be mounted. The war. Councils of the galaxy had come to a horrifying realization. They had no defense against this. And yet, something even worse lurked in the minds of those who understood the situation. The warship had demonstrated overwhelming power, but had it truly gone all out? No one knew. The reports were fragmented, filled with inconsistencies. Some captains swore the ship had never fired a single shot, that their crews had simply died, without explanation. Others claimed their weapons had been turned against them, that their own munitions had been redirected at impossible angles, slicing through their own formations like a surgeon's blade. Some ships had simply gone dark, vanishing from all communications, only to be found later, intact, silent, and empty. There was no pattern, no understanding, no logic to the warship's actions. That was what made it truly terrifying. Because it meant humanity was not playing a game the rest of the galaxy understood. They had been operating under the assumption that the warship was simply an advanced piece of technology, a superior battleship designed for war. But what if it was something else, a weapon not built for conquest, not even for battle, but something beyond their comprehension? The Council had tried to ban it, to erase its existence from the records, to pretend the event had never happened. But silence did not erase fear. It only gave it time to grow. And in that silence, a far more terrifying realization began to take shape. The warship had not been destroyed. It had not been captured. It had not even been damaged. And if there was one, could there be more? The Council had to know. They could not afford to remain blind. They had to find out where it came from. The most powerful intelligence networks in the galaxy mobilized in secret. Every scrap of information on humanity was dissected, analyzed, and compared to historical records. At first, the analysts believed they were looking for a single breakthrough. Some hidden project, some miraculous leap in technology that had allowed humanity to create this monstrosity. They assumed the answer would be found in shipyards, in engineering logs, in weapon development programs. They were wrong, because as the investigation deepened, a far more disturbing picture emerged. Had not been a single breakthrough. It had been deliberate, methodical, generational. The warning signs had been there for centuries. Humanity had always been different. Their early spacefaring years had been riddled with conflicts, each war forging them into something sharper, deadlier, more adaptable. Unlike the older species of the galaxy, who had grown comfortable with the slow march of progress, humanity had never stopped innovating. They had never settled. Every war, every setback, every tragedy had been an opportunity. They did not accept defeat. They learned from it. The project that had given birth to the warship had not begun in secrecy, not in the shadows of some hidden facility. It had started in the minds of humanity's greatest thinkers, centuries before the warship had even been conceived. And by the time the rest of the galaxy had realized what was happening, it was too late. The warship had not been an accident. It had been the inevitable conclusion of humanity's existence. Something far worse than fear began to creep through the Council's ranks. Because if the warship had been inevitable, then that meant humanity had not merely built it. They had always intended to build it. From the moment they had taken to the stars, from the moment they had first encountered the greater galactic community, they had known that one day the war would come, and they had prepared for it in ways no other species had. They had made sure that when the time came, there would be no competition. The Council's intelligence operatives dug deeper, searching for anything, any indication that humanity had expended its resources, that this had been a desperate gamble, that the warship was a one-time creation, never to be replicated. But that was not what they found. Instead, they uncovered something far worse. There had been a second facility, and then a third, then a fourth. The realization spread like wildfire through the highest ranks of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The first warship had been a prototype. There were more, possibly hundreds, perhaps even thousands, and no one knew when they would appear or where. The war councils convened in frantic desperation. Plans were made. Armies were mobilized. But deep down, they all knew the truth. It was already too late. Because humanity had not just built a warship. They had built a future. A future where they were the only ones who mattered. A future where no empire, no alliance, no civilization could stand against them. And in that silence, in that creeping realization, another thought formed. If the warships were still out there, waiting, watching, then that meant humanity had made a choice. They had chosen not to wipe the galaxy clean. Not yet. But if the galaxy refused to change, if they forced humanity's hand, then the warship would return. And this time, it would not leave survivors. The Galactic Council's greatest minds had spent centuries forging a fragile balance of power, hundreds of empires, countless species, all coexisting through a web of uneasy truces, alliances, and silent threats. The thought of any one species becoming too powerful was unthinkable. The very fabric of galactic civilization depended on that careful equilibrium. But now, that balance had been shattered. Humanity had done something no one else had. They had built a warship so powerful, so utterly beyond the limits of conventional warfare, that its very existence undermined everything the galaxy had ever believed about war, power, and survival. The mere knowledge that one such warship had wiped out entire battle fleets with ease had thrown every civilization into unprecedented terror. And the worst part? That warship had not been destroyed. It had not been defeated. It had simply vanished into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but fear. A silent, lingering horror in the minds of those who now realized they had never truly understood humanity. That was the moment everything changed. The council leaders, the admirals of vast fleets, the rulers of empires that had endured for thousands of years, all found themselves confronted with a single, undeniable truth. They were no longer in control of their own fate. For the first time in recorded history, the great powers of the galaxy united. Rival empires that had warred for centuries, species that despised each other to the core, enemies who had never spoken without threats. Their past grudges meant nothing now. Fear had erased those divides. The war councils convened in secrecy, deep within fortified strongholds, hidden from prying human eyes. They needed a plan, a countermeasure, something, anything, to balance the scales before it was too late. Their intelligence networks scoured every corner of known space. Spy ships slithered through the void, infiltrating human-controlled sectors, desperate for any information that could explain how a single species had outpaced the entire galaxy. Every technological analysis, every military strategy, every scientific breakthrough humanity had ever produced was examined with fanatical intensity. At first, they assumed humanity had discovered some lost technology, some ancient weapon from a forgotten civilization that had given them an unfair advantage. The alternative was simply too terrifying to accept. But as the investigation deepened, a far more disturbing realization took shape. There had been no ancient artifact, no lost superweapon, no divine intervention. Humanity had built the warship themselves, and that meant they could build more. Panic spread like wildfire. The Council's best scientists worked day and night, dissecting every human technological advancement, every military doctrine, every fragment of intelligence. They had to find a flaw, a weakness, something that could even the playing field. But every answer they uncovered only made their terror worse, because humanity had not created their warship overnight. It had been the result of centuries of relentless progress. Where other civilizations had stagnated, content in their dominance, humanity had been forging themselves into a weapon. They had fought wars against themselves that no sane species would have dared to. They had turned every conflict into an opportunity to grow stronger, to innovate, to refine their technology in ways no other species had considered necessary. Their entire civilization had been preparing, whether they had known it or not, and the warship, it was simply the final step in that process. A culmination of every lesson they had learned, every sacrifice they had made, every battle they had fought. A doomsday weapon disguised as a starship, and now it could not be stopped. Desperation took hold. The great powers, once so arrogant in their superiority, now realized they were staring at the end of their era. The fragile web of alliances that had held the galaxy together for so long was unraveling at a terrifying speed. The old laws of war no longer applied, because humanity had rewritten them with something no other species could match. If they did not act now, there might not be a galaxy left to save. A plan, the only plan that made sense, began to take shape. Humanity had to be erased. Not just the warship, not just their fleets, all of them, every colony, every outpost, every trace of their existence. It was the only way. The decision was not made lightly. Some called it madness. Some hesitated. Some feared the consequences of wiping out an entire species. But fear of what would happen if they didn't was far stronger. They had no choice. Humanity had become a threat to existence itself. And so, the greatest armada the galaxy had ever assembled was born. A purging fleet. Hundreds of thousands of warships, drawn from every major power, united under a single purpose: total annihilation. They would strike before humanity could retaliate, before another warship could appear, before the nightmare became unstoppable. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. And so, with grim determination, the fleet launched. They would end humanity before humanity ended them. As the armada surged forward, blazing through the void at impossible speeds, there was one thing none of them knew. The warship had been waiting. It had not disappeared into the darkness out of fear. It had not retreated. It had been watching, calculating, preparing, and now it knew exactly what was coming. The galaxy's greatest fleet was on its way, believing it was about to strike the killing blow. They thought they had the advantage. They thought they had time. They were wrong. Because the most overpowered human warship was already in position, and it was about to remind the galaxy why it had been banned in the first place.